One day you're wealthy, the next you're bankrupt, all because of a flower. In 1637, a single tulip bulb sold for the price of a mansion. Merchants, farmers, teachers, and ordinary citizens sold everything they owned to join the madness. Then, without warning, it all fell apart. People who owned mansions at sunrise were begging in the streets by sunset. What power did this simple flower hold over an entire nation? Picture Amsterdam in the 1630s. The canals are being dug, the buildings rising, and the ships of the Dutch East India Company are returning from voyages laden with spices, silks, and unimaginable wealth. The Netherlands isn't just wealthy, it's revolutionary. They've recently won independence from Spain, creating the world's first modern republic. Banking has been revolutionized. The world's first stock exchange is thriving in Amsterdam. The Dutch Golden Age is in full swing. Art is flourishing. Rembrandt and Vermeer are painting masterpieces that will endure for centuries. Scientific innovation is everywhere. This is the Silicon Valley of the 17th century, a place where anything seems possible. But alongside this economic boom, something else is happening. Something that begins innocently enough, a passion for gardening. The Dutch have always loved their gardens, but when exotic tulips arrive from the Ottoman Empire in the late 1500s, they become absolutely obsessed. Imagine the wealthiest merchants in Amsterdam gathering to admire these exotic flowers, competing to show off the rarest varieties in their gardens. These weren't native flowers. They were exotic, unusual, and, most importantly, difficult to obtain. The perfect status symbol. Here's where things get interesting. Tulips take 7 years to mature from seed. The only way to get a specific variety is to grow it from an offset bulb, and some varieties are exceedingly rare. The most prized tulips were the broken tulips, flowers with streaks and flames of color. What nobody knew then was that these spectacular patterns were actually caused by a virus. That's right. The most valuable tulips were infected with a disease that weakened them but created stunning visual effects. The most famous of these was the Semper Augustus, a white tulip with crimson flames. At the height of the mania, a single bulb could sell for more than 10 times the annual salary of a skilled craftsman. Imagine paying the equivalent of a decade's worth of your income for a single flower bulb. Sounds crazy, right? Well, just wait, it gets crazier. By the 1630s, tulips weren't just flowers anymore. They had become financial instruments. Tulip auctions became major social events. Taverns established what they called colleges, essentially unofficial trading floors where bulbs were bought and sold over vast quantities of alcohol. Not exactly the most sober financial decision-making environment. Prices rose steadily, then rapidly, then exponentially. You'd hear stories of people buying bulbs for 1,800 guilders one week and selling them for 2,500 the next. Others would flip rare varieties for double their purchase price in just days. But here's where it gets truly wild. The peak trading season for tulips was winter, when the bulbs were dormant, safely in the ground. So what were people trading? Not actual tulips, but paper contracts. Essentially, futures contracts. You weren't buying a tulip, you were buying the right to a tulip that would be dug up in the spring. And these contracts changed hands rapidly, sometimes 10 times in a day, each time at a higher price. Sound familiar? It should. This is exactly the kind of speculative trading we've seen in modern bubbles. As prices climbed, more people got involved. Doctors, lawyers, merchants, of course, but also bakers, blacksmiths, carpenters, and sailors. Even farmers who grew the tulips started speculating on their own crops. The stories from this period are almost unbelievable. People selling their looms, trading family heirlooms, and mortgaging businesses, all to get in on the tulip trade. One documented transaction involved the exchange of a single bulb for 12 acres of land, a mansion, a mill, a brewery, 4 horses, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, 4 barrels of beer, 2 barrels of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a bed, and a suit of clothes. All for a single flower bulb. I'm not making this up. But why? Why did reasonable people lose their minds over plants? The answer lies in human psychology, something that hasn't changed much in 400 years. First, there was exclusivity. Only the wealthy could afford rare tulips initially, making them powerful status symbols. Second, there was the novelty factor. These were exotic treasures from a distant land. And finally, there was the most powerful force in any bubble, the fear of missing out. Imagine hearing about your neighbors doubling their money in weeks. Everyone around you is getting rich from tulips. If you don't get in now, you'll be left behind. This exact same psychology drives modern bubbles too. By January 1637, tulip prices had reached truly astronomical levels. A single bulb of the Viceroy variety sold for 3,000 guilders, enough to feed, clothe, and house a family for half a lifetime. And then, in February 1637, it all fell apart. It began with a routine tulip auction in Haarlem, where, for the first time, buyers failed to show up. Word spread quickly. Within days, panic selling began. People couldn't find buyers for their contracts. The market collapsed virtually overnight. Prices plummeted by 95% or more in a matter of weeks. Those who had bought at the peak found themselves holding worthless paper, promises to buy tulips that were now worth a fraction of the agreed price. People who had mortgaged their businesses, sold their livestock, even traded their homes, all for tulip contracts, suddenly faced financial ruin. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your life savings, invested in what seemed like a sure thing, had evaporated. The government tried to step in, converting tulip contracts to options contracts at 10% of their face value. But even this couldn't stop the collapse. Court cases flooded the system as buyers tried to escape their obligations. Judges found themselves in an impossible position. How could they enforce contracts for flowers that had been valued at the price of a house, but were now worth barely more than a decent meal? After this, Dutch society was forced to confront some uncomfortable truths. How had so many intelligent people been swept up in such obvious folly? The crash didn't destroy the Dutch economy. The Republic remained wealthy and powerful. But it did leave deep scars on the national psyche and became a cautionary tale that echoes to this day. The term Tulip Mania has become shorthand for any speculative frenzy, but was it really as catastrophic as legend suggests? Some modern historians argue that the traditional account of Tulip Mania has been exaggerated. They point out that few people actually went bankrupt and that the economic impact was limited mainly to wealthy merchants who could afford the losses. But I think that misses the point. The psychological patterns of Tulip Mania have repeated themselves throughout history, regardless of the exact scale of the damage. Just think about it. The South Sea bubble of 1720, railway mania in the 1840s, the stock market crash of 1929, dot-com companies in the late 1990s, housing in 2008, and cryptocurrency in recent years. Each time, the details change, but the human psychology remains the same. Greed, FOMO, the belief that this time it's different, and the conviction that you can spot the peak and cash out before everyone else. Even today, almost 4 centuries later, tulips remain central to Dutch identity. The country produces billions of tulip bulbs annually, and the flower has become a national symbol. Tourists flock to the Netherlands each spring to see the tulip fields in bloom, a sea of color stretching to the horizon. It's a sight that would have been familiar to those 17th century Dutch merchants, though they might be surprised to learn that today's tulip bulbs sell for just a few euros each. So, what can we learn from Tulip Mania? Perhaps it's that human nature hasn't changed much in 400 years. We still chase trends, we still fear missing out, and we still convince ourselves that we're smarter than the market. Or maybe it's that value is always subjective. Those tulips weren't inherently worthless. They were beautiful flowers that brought joy. They just weren't worth the price of a house. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler, that in every era, there will be manias and bubbles, moments of collective delusion where rational people make irrational decisions.